Welcome back to our panel devoted to society. And I'm very pleased to introduce the chair of this panel. Peter Braga is a PhD candidate at the UCL School of Slavonic and Eastern European Studies. He works on his thesis devoted to the influence of Chinese soft power and the diffusion of authoritarian values in Eastern Europe. Peter has been very helpful and has played a significant role in putting together the conferences over the last few years, and I would like to thank him again for doing it this year. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jarek. That blurb is a bit old, but that's okay. That's more or less what I'm studying. I also focus on China's Belt and Road Initiative as well. But let's move on to the panel. So there are 3 speakers today. There is covering a variety of subjects. The first speaker will be Mark Cinkevich. The second speaker will be Lizaveta Dubinka-Hushcha. I think I pronounced that right. And Alena Marková. Mark, the first speaker, Mark Cinkevich, is an independent researcher who will be presenting on characterizing the recent protests in Belarus as a post-colonial revolution. The second presenter, Lizaveta Dubinka-Hushcha, is a scholar of international relations and foreign policy who specializes in small states and soft power. Lizaveta did her PhD on Danish foreign policy in 2014 and a postdoctorate on collective intelligence and participatory democracy at Copenhagen Business School from 2019 to 2020. She's currently affiliated with the Danish Institute for International Studies, and she teaches international relations and political economy at Copenhagen Business School. Today, she will be presenting on a historical topic, which is outside her usual specialization. Her paper is titled National Shrines and Women's Power, the History of Sophia of Polotsk, the Queen of Denmark. And Alena Marková, our third speaker, who is a history professor at Charles University in Prague, and also a past keynote speaker for this conference. I think it was our third annual conference. She today will be presenting on the struggle for the Belarusian language during the 1990s. On this panel, we will be giving each speaker 10 minutes and up to 13 minutes to present. This will leave us with about 10 to 15 minutes for questions. So without further ado, I'd like to open the floor to Mark Cinkevich.
Hello, thank you very much for this opportunity to present my research here. Also, Peter, if I may ask you, should I have any connection problems, then please let me know and I will reconnect with my phone so that you can hear me well.
Okay.
Is it okay? All right. So the events of recent months in Belarus run contrary to the old ideas about Belarus as a country with a non-protestant population that lacks its own subject. Belarusian revolution is not a classic post-colonial revolution, which can be analyzed following the footsteps of Spivak and Baba. By classic frame, I mean the one described, for example, by Abushenko in relation to Belarus, where the emancipation of Belarusian subjectivity is only possible when autobiographies are told in our own language. Many Belarusian post-colonialists envision that finding our own subjectivity and language of self-description should be done by means of retrospective activation of sources of national identity. However, the retrospective activation of sources of national identity in Belarus is a problematic task, given that historically, Belarus was a space of intensive colonization processes emanating from both West and East. It has led to a situation where it's difficult to discern a single oppressor and where neither ethno-linguistic nor ethno-cultural boundaries entirely determine national identity. So many prominent Belarusian researchers like Akudovich, Pozniak, Pershai, Gapova, Babkov started working with places of remembrance and memorials. For example, the memorial Kuropathy plays an important role in articulating the break with the USSR colonial experience. Kuropathy is a memorial to the victims of mass shootings who were mainly Belarusians, Ukrainians, Lithuanians, Latvians. According to Pozniak, Kuropathy marked the beginning of the new rise in Belarus, the beginning of the end of communism for the country. However, the search for Belarusian identity by means of retrospective activation of the divide between what is Belarusian and what is Soviet has led to a series of dead ends. In the case of the Soviet legacy, the main problem was that the modern Belarusian state sees itself as the direct heir of the BSSR. The de-Sovietization project was never implemented in Belarus. In 1990s, nationalism in Belarus was weaker than in any other post-Soviet country. Today, Belarusian government remains the most loyal heir of the USSR in the entire post-Soviet space. Valentin Akudovich claims that Soviet past plays a key role for Belarus as the only direct historical legacy. As a country formed based on BSSR, Belarus is distinguished by a more pronounced Belarusian Soviet identity than a Belarusian ethnocultural one. Continuity with BSSR is part of the official discourse in modern Belarus. In 1994, Lukashenko restored Soviet symbols as the symbols of Republic of Belarus. He also removed Belarusian textbooks from the school. The country's official Independence Day is the day of the liberation of Minsk from Nazi troops, not the date of the adoption of the Declaration of State Sovereignty. The Great Patriotic War stays at the core of the state ideology, making it like a communal point of identity. The legal and administrative structures of the Soviet period, like KGB, continue to function. The failure to form Belarusian national identity through the politics of memory and the failure to draw a divide between Belarusian and Soviet is explained by two factors: the weakness of romantic ethno-nationalism and the refusal of the liberation movement in Belarus to consider Soviet legacy as colonial. The refusal of the liberation movement to consider Belarusian legacy of the liberation movement in Belarus to consider Soviet legacy as colonial was acknowledged already by Akudovich in early 2000s. He attempted to revive some true historical Belarusianness and claimed that it was a futile attempt to pass off textual fantasy for social reality. To claim that Soviet Russia colonized Belarus is not accurate because Poland has thoroughly colonized it before that. As a result, the contemporary Belarusian liberation movement does not primarily aim to get rid of the Soviet cultural, architectural, memorial, linguistic heritage. Moreover, Belarusian post-colonial revolution paradoxically happens also in Russian language. Therefore, without canceling either the historical role of Soviet regime as limiting Belarusian national culture or its repressive ideological content, the consistent neo-Soviet position of Belarusian leadership changed the very positionality of the Belarusian society in relation to the Soviet heritage. After the collapse of the USSR, Belarus continued to inhabit and form the Soviet discourse, establishing control over the discursive meaning of the Soviet. What was named Soviet and equated with colonial got reappropriated by the Belarusian government in the context of the dissolution of the original determinant of the discourse, the Soviet Russia. The key characteristic of Belarusian post-colonial revolution is that the new Belarusian subject does not arise in the course of articulating its own oppression against external oppressor. It arises in the course of internal struggle against the government that appropriated the Soviet discourse. Belarusian subject appears not through the denial of the colonial heritage, which is already appropriated and put into service, but through self-awareness within the framework of existing historical and cultural narratives. Belarusian subject does not take the position of a victim of colonization because of the Belarusian government itself has taken over the mechanisms of hegemonic Soviet and neo-Soviet discourse. The described situation where Belarusian government itself reappropriated the oppressive Soviet discourse explains that the unfolding post-colonial revolution in Belarus primarily focuses on the change of internal power. This frame also views contemporary Russia as posing a threat to Belarus, not because of some historical imperial aspirations, nor inertia of the old structures of colonial dependence. Russia poses a conceptually new and actual threat of colonial subordination. An example of new colonial dependence infrastructure that Russia is actively forming is the Ostrovets nuclear power plant near the northwestern border of Belarus. A necessary condition for this nuclear power plant's operation is the consumption of surplus energy by Russia. The project aims to integrate Belarus infrastructurally and dismantle Belarusian sovereignty from within. Conclusion also in relation to this rich discussion I followed yesterday and today. In the summer of 2020, Belarusian society has started a process of acquiring its own subjectivity, a subjectivity which is independent from both historical and contemporary colonizing powers. To acquire subjectivity, Belarusians need to master new narrative strategies at their disposal. As researchers, we have to develop a new language, a new terminology, which would allow us to address the complex situation we are dealing with. Contemporary Belarus is not a post-Soviet space because it has never stopped being Soviet in the first place. We should adapt a suitable vocabulary and terminology to address the situation in Belarus. So I would suggest to name it Capio-Soviet instead. What Capio-Soviet here means is that Belarus inherited the Soviet discourse, reappropriated it, and continued to inhabit it after the collapse of the USSR itself. So Belarus turns out to inhabit the discourse, the determinant of which already ceased to exist. And as Belarusians, we need to learn to talk about identity, which does not have a ready-made historical interpretation, but is being reformulated along the new and emerging narrative lines. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Mark. That was very swift. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the next two speakers, and then we'll come back and open the floor again for questions. So if you have any questions, you can still write them down to the main chat, or you can keep them in your mind or whatever, and then ask them when all our speakers are done. So without further ado, could I please ask Lizaveta Dubinka-Hushcha to the floor?
Yes, thank you very much, Peter. And I would like to share my screen if possible. Please let me know if you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can. You might want to do full screen so we don't see the, yeah, perfect. There you go.
Perfect. Great. Yeah. Thank you very much for the introduction. And just to make sure, do you also see the camera overlapping with the slides? Or?
Yes, at the moment I do. I don't know about everybody else. I assume so.
I might just
it was fine. There was no need to change. It's exactly that. Yeah.
Okay, but then it's just because I'm going to have a lot of visual material. So thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for having me here today. And I'm going to talk about the topic of national shrines and women's power, and the history of Sophia of Polotsk, the Queen of Denmark. The life of a historian can take an unprecedented turn if you really dig very deep and wide in your subject, which I did at that point. I was writing my PhD on Danish foreign policy as a small state. And as the first Belarusian to investigate into the Danish foreign policy and Danish-Belarusian relations, I was trying to find historical ties and came across this hypothesis by a Danish historian and museum director, Fritz Lindahl, about the origin of the cross of Dauma from Belarus. I would like to say that Belarus can be considered and has been considered a terra incognita in Denmark, a country whose identity is often mistakenly associated with Russia. And that's also due to the translation of the name of Belarus into the Danish language as White Russia, Hviderusland. So Belarus is often associated as some white part of that region of the world, a blank spot on the Danish mental map. However, we all know that Belarusians have a lot to share with the Baltic countries, Western European countries, and here Denmark is not an exception. After gaining its formal independence in 1991, Belarus has been facing this problem of restoring its national identity, language, and culture, as has been also said here before, which would serve as the basis of its de facto independence. And the idea for this research project for me was I was inspired by the unexplored political as well as cultural connections between the Belarusian lands and the Kingdom of Denmark. I believe that historically and culturally, Belarus is as close to Denmark as the Baltic states, and the story of the cross of Dagmar can serve as one of the symbols of this proximity. Thus, the purpose of my work is to explore and to bring up to the wider public the dynamics of Danish-Belarusian historical ties through the interpretation of their common cultural chronotopes using the terminology of Michael Bakhtin. The cross of Dagmar, a Byzantine Engolpion cross, Engolpion meaning that it can contain a piece of relics dating back approximately between 1000 and 1200, very small in size, in fact, 3.4 centimeters, but it is one of the biggest Danish national symbols. It is a shrine, and small copies of this cross are often given on different occasions, usually baptism and weddings. One of them was actually given as a gift to Danish princess who was getting married with a representative of the British royal house. So a copy of this cross is also to be found in the UK, in fact. The original of this cross was found in St. Bent's Church in the town of Ringsted in Denmark, as far back as 1680s by a priest of the church, Christian Blichfeldt. And he was doing some excavations and preparing, clearing out the ground and preparing actually some place for his own grave in the church. And he found this cross in one of the graves. You can see here on the slides. This is the graves of Valdemar II and the Queen Dagmar II, Queen Dagmar, the wife of Valdemar II. Here is an unfinished list of all the royal personalities who are buried in this church. But you can see that also King Valdemar I and his wife, Queen Sophia, are also buried in this church, actually very close to all the others. And as also follows from the title of my presentation, Sophia came from Polotsk and she was from the Belarusian lands at that time. Who was Dagmar? Dagmar was a Bohemian princess. She came from Czech lands, Bohemia. She was a daughter of King Ottokar, and she was married to Valdemar II, who was the son of Sophia. And this cross was found somewhere in between those graves. They say between the daughter of Sophia and Dagmar, who was her daughter-in-law. The cross was not revealed to the public immediately. The priest stored it for about 10 years before he gave it to the Kunstkammer, which was the proto-national museum at that time. So he gave it to the Royal Kunstkammer in 1695, in fact. These are the pictures of Dagmar. She died very young, And there were a lot of folk songs dedicated to her, and some of them they even translated into English. Queen Dagmar, who lies in Ribe. So she was known very well in the Danish poetry. And there were monuments dedicated to her. There were songs. There were also pictures drawn of her at a later stage, of course. And so one of the hypotheses about the origin of the cross was suggested by Fritze Lindell, the former director of the National Museum. And she wrote in her article in a Danish newspaper, Kristelig Dagblad, in 1978, that she believed that Queen Sophia, a daughter of a Belarusian prince, Volodar, brought this cross with her to Denmark and gave it to her daughter, Rehica, in whose grave the cross was found. And according to Lindahl, the road entry to Denmark was possibly through the city of Minsk, where Sophia came from. Lindahl assumed that this Byzantine cross, whose value was as big as 2 castles at that time, was found in this grave of her daughter, of Sophia. And in fact, Lindahl questioned the arguments of the priest who found the cross, because he found the cross in, it's not certain in whose grave he found the cross, but he attributed it to Dagmar because she was so well known and was cherished by the people as being very mild. She died very young. She had this very beautiful image, and in fact, she was even turned as a saint. So for him, it was not a question of whom to attribute the cross, because she was the one who was best known, contrary to Sophia's daughter, Rehica, who was an unknown queen of Sweden. She was married to a Swede, and she was not particularly appreciated by the Danes, so he would not attribute this cross to her. And that was it. But Queen Rehica's tomb was next to Queen Dagmar's tomb, and they were both completely destroyed when the priest was excavating them. The original of the cross is not, it's not certain where it was produced, but in the volume, The Glory of Byzantium, published by the Metropolitan Museum of Art, it's claimed that the cross could either have been produced in Thessaloniki in Greece, or in the Kiev area, because it was very similar in style to the Kievan crosses, as you can also see on the picture here. And in fact, where there is no archaeological evidence for the Thessaloniki hypothesis, Fritze Lindahl's theory about the cross coming from the Belarusian lands does actually have some archaeological confirmation and background, because the crosses of this type, the Enkolpian crosses, were very popular also in the Belarusian lands. And here I have an example of a cross found in the area of Nyamiga.
2 minutes.
Okay, have to wrap up. So those examples of Kievan crosses. And now we all know that Polotsk was a flourishing city at the time and maintained relations with Byzantine. We know also about this prominent woman from Polotsk who ordered to produce exactly a cross made of gold with a cell animal using the same technique as in the cross of Dagmar. Here I'm using the pictures, the photocopies of the St. Euphrosyne cross. And by the way, St. Euphrosyne was an aunt of Sophia. She was her relative, and they lived at the same time. So this cross, these are the pictures of the cross of St. Euphrosyne. And here I put side by side the color picture, this enlargement from the cross of Dagmar, and the black and white picture or the gray picture from the cross of St. Euphrosyne. So you can compare the images from the two crosses. These are the elements of comparison. And of course, we should take into account that we don't have the original of the St. Euphrosyne cross anymore because it was stolen or disappeared during the Second World War. So here I just compared, and this is the front and back side of the cross of Dagmar. And here are all the various copies of it nowadays. So the original from the left, and then you can see that it's very difficult to replicate this technique because the lines on the original are very thin. It's called the cell animal or cloisonné technique that was used. It's nearly impossible or very costly to make it nowadays. So very few people can master this technique. And I managed to find a person in Belarus who was able to testify to the resemblance between the crosses of St. Euphrosyne and the cross of Dagmar, and who believes that they belonged to the same school, if not the same master. I have here is a picture of Queen Sophia restored by her cranium. She was probably neglected by historians because history was written by Saxo Grammaticus, and he was a man of Bishop Absalon, who ordered him to write a Danish chronicle, Gesta Danorum, at that time. And Saxo actually didn't like Sophia because she was quite a powerful woman. So he did everything possible just not to mention her at all, or when he was mentioning her, he was mentioning her not in a very nice way. So therefore, we know very little about Sophia, but what we know is she's like about this forgotten queen is that she was engaged to Valdemar in 1954. She was sent to Denmark to become the queen. Denmark was in the middle of the civil war at that time, so three men, Knud, Sven, and Valdemar, were fighting for power in Denmark. Those three men, and eventually Sophia was half sister to Knud. And Knud made an agreement with Valdemar that Valdemar would marry his half-sister, and in exchange they would both have power. But
Please
Knud
start to wrap it up a bit.
Okay, that's basically I'm in the end of it. Yes, so Sven killed Knud, then somebody killed Sven, and Valdemar became the only king. And Sophia, because the history was written by the bishop man who didn't like Sophia, she was quite neglected in that period. But we have evidence of her being a very important person for Denmark at that time. There's evidence of her being depicted on the coins together with the king, which was quite a thing. An example of 4 coins, and here is her portrait, also restoration, the picture of the church where she is buried, and the church in Kalundborg. They say she was also influenced by her, the architecture having the Byzantine cross in its bases, and the cross of Ve in Sweden, where she also donated money to, and it was written in the chronicle. And that's basically my conclusion here. Whether the cross belonged to Sophia, Dauma, Hitsa, we cannot really prove at that stage, at the moment. But it's most likely that it was found in the other grave. But in any case, this cross continues to be a symbol of the great spiritual value that a small object can possess. And I call it a timeless soft power legacy from one or several significant women of the Middle Ages that were neglected by the chronicles. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Alena, would you please take the floor?
Okay, today we are going to talk about struggle for Belarusian language during 19th, and we will focus our attention on the process of introduction of Belarusian language as the only state language in 1990. And the main goal of today's presentation is to analyze the reaction and the feedback to this implementation from population. And at the very beginning, some historical background. On January 26, 1919, the famous Act on Languages was adopted. And according to this act, the Belarusian language became the only state language in the Republic of Belarus. And the introduction of Belarusian language as the only state language was an extremely important part of the national emancipation and post-Soviet transformation of Belarus during 19th.
Alena, could you go full screen, please? Because now we
I don't know how can I do it.
There's a button at the bottom, at the right corner, bottom right corner. No, go down. In the right-hand corner, next to Poznamki, somewhere.
It's the magnification thing, the button that's right next to the magnification slider.
So can you see this Poznamki at the bottom? Yeah, go a bit more to the right.
Here? No, I just...
Okay, let's leave it like this.
I have no idea. I'm so sorry.
No worries. We might as well just keep on time.
So, I'm an alphabet. I'm illiterate computer.
Well, let's continue then. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Okay.
Alena, excuse me, could upstairs also upper than navr, there is a screen you see on the red line near to London 221.
Or if you are using a PC, you just press F5.
F5, yeah.
Yes. So let's try F5. No, it doesn't work.
Okay, that's fine. Let's just move on then.
Yeah, let's be so it's like technical issue I can't manage. Okay, yeah, so the intensive promotion of the Belarusian language in public discourse was accompanied not only by an active political discussion in public discourse, but also it was accompanied by a very massive reaction of many Belarusian citizens. And the preliminary draft of the project, of the act, was published in press, and citizens were asked to express their opinion before adoption and implementation of the act on languages. And citizens began to write letters to different institutions, for example, to TV and radio and so on. But probably one of the most important of this institution was very special institution, and it was special commission on nationality policy and inter-ethnic relations under the Supreme Soviet of the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic. And this commission was established in 1989, and the main goal was to deal with different national issues such as language issues and so on. And therefore, the majority of letters were sent to the commission under the Supreme Soviet. And by January 25th, the day before adoption of the end, more than 20,000 people have expressed their opinion, and more than 900 individual and collective letters were received. And actually, our main question to answer, so let me take a look to the previous slide. How many people supported such radical change? What kind of argumentation did they apply, and what was the language of the letter, and what was the social background of the author? So actually the letters, and of course, so time does not allow to share detailed analysis, and that is why I'm going to share some preliminary results. Social groups and backgrounds of people who actually were writing the letters. Well, I must say that preliminary analysis demonstrate that all spectrum of all social group of population and all society of all ages and generation was involved. And it was not matter of only one social group. And it means that this is very mistake to think that, for example, Belarusian issue was supported mainly by, let's say, urban intellectuals from the capital city of Minsk and so on. No, this is mistake, because actually all social stratas were presented equally. It means we can find letters from workers, teachers, civil servant, and many others. And for example, you can see here, this is example letters which was written by worker from Belarusian and so on. And it means that this question was extremely acute, and retired people and veterans were active too. And usually, you know, retired people, they are more conservative, and actually sometimes they incline towards Soviet past, Soviet identity, not this time. And actually they supported Belarusization and Belarusian as the only language very intensively. And also it was very equal situation, city and countryside. It means all regions, all cities and countrysides, their share was equal if we are talking about geography. And what about argumentation for supporting, for example, of Belarusian language as the main state language? People who wanted to support Belarusian appealed to the future generation, and actually often they write that our children will not forgive us if we don't save and we don't support Belarusian as the only language now. And many authors of many letters, they mention the glorious past of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and Belarusian is the only language during the Grand Duchy of Lithuania period. And actually, this is very interesting historical argument for newly proclaimed statehood. And another part of argumentation, this is like an act of justice because of previous oppression, because of previous Russification, and language as the national heritage, and also language as a soul of the nation. So you can see this is very, very Herderian argumentation. You know, Johann Gottfried Herder, the main philosopher, the author of the concept like a language as a soul of the nation. And now you can see that like ordinary people apply very Herderian argumentation. We have to save our soul. We have to save Belarusian language, and we have to support promotion of the Belarusian language as the one and the only state language. So, of course, some people, they were against adoption of the Act on Languages, and but I must say they were in minority. Their opinion were like minority opinion. However, what kind of argumentation did they apply? Actually, the main reason not to apply Belarusian as the only language is to just don't spend money on this issue, because actually the economic is very slow. Let's support economical issue instead of language issue. And also some people, they mention the threat of nationalism and extremism like separatism. And again, their voices, they are minority voices. What was the language of the letter? Actually, many authors, they wrote in Russian and in Belarusian. And sometimes when you see Belarusian contain many grammar mistakes. So as you can see, for example, this exam from the National Archive in Minsk. So at the very beginning, you can see, for example, Russian language, and after author decided to switch into Belarusian language, and he's continued in Belarusian language. So I mean, many letters were written in Russian to support Belarusian language as the only one. So, and sometimes this is very interesting that many authors of the letters state explicitly their nationality. It means, for example, Lieutenant Colonel Sodnik, Pole, and Ukrainian and Russian. And actually, the main idea, yeah, we are not Belarusian, but we want to support Belarusian as the only state language.
2 minutes remaining.
Yeah. And actually, many letters, they had like a different offers and requests, and many citizens, they actually wanted to make terms of transition to the Belarusian language shorter, to reduce term of transition, because the Act of Languages Act on Languages had a special schedule of transition to the Belarusian language. The transition should not be sudden or violent, and it's supposed that all citizens, like for example, state officials and so on, have 3 or 5 years to transfer, for example, record keeping into Belarusian, so it was not violent. And many citizens, they wanted to make this term short, even shorter than, for example, standard term of 3 years. So actually I was surprised. And also many authors of the letter, they wanted to reintroduce Tarashkevich Belarusian orthography as a reason to restore like historical justice, because this is not enough to have Belarusian as the only language. Let's have Tarashkevitsa as the only Belarusian language now. And now this is the main question, and what are the statistical data? How many people supported such radical language change in 1919? And as we can see, like almost 900 individual and collective letters were received, and almost 14,000 citizens supported the adoption of the Act on Languages. Almost 2,000 citizens were against the Belarusian language as the only one language, and almost 2,000 citizens wanted to support two state languages, Russian and Belarusian. So I must say, like preliminary conclusion, the support was very high and intensive. And to make a conclusion, and probably it will be better to say instead of conclusion, because actually we have to take into consideration today's situation. Can we apply it, for example, for today's situation and so on? So instead of conclusion, I decided to make an open question for you and for discussion, for example, if we are lucky enough and we have time. What would happen in case of an implementation of the Act on Languages 2.1 now? And should we include the language issue in the future political and transformational agenda in Belarus? So thank you very much, and I'll be happy to hear your question. Thank you very much again, Peter and Jarek.
Yeah, thank you, Alena. So now the panel is opening the floor to questions. And so feel free to post them on the chat or to pop on via your microphone if that suits you better. So we'll start with Jarek. That's the first hand up I see. Please jump in.
Hi, thanks. Actually, I was wondering whether Mark could respond to those questions which Alena posed. And more specifically, I'm interested in hearing more about the attitude to the language among the protesters. Mark is the only speaker joining us from Belarus, so he has first-hand experience. Thanks.
And in fact, I'm also going to chime in. So yes, please answer those questions, Mark, that Alena posted, if it's possible. And then also, because listening to your presentation and reading your paper, which you sent me, I would like to add a third question. It's probably going to be answered in your question to Alena, but could you please give an example of how the 2020 summer protests have forced Belarusian society to start a new national identity or a post-colonial subjectivity, or however you're calling it, defining it? Could you please give some examples? Thank you.
I'll try to answer these questions to the best of my ability. So first of all, I think that we still lack like a really interdisciplinary and substantiate analysis of the situation that unfolds in Belarus in a lot, because the governmental institutions, they simply they cannot do, due to the situation in the country, the research that has to be done. Although there are some people who are trying to do this, and I admire their work, but there are still a lot of limitations. And also there is a problem with that. Some even Belarusian researchers who live full-time abroad, they still a little bit reluctant to talk about the situation in Belarus because of how much the situation has changed. So it leaves us in a situation where there is a lot to be done, even in the moment we are now. And in relation to the language, that was a very interesting talk that you gave. And I was thinking that with the language, the thing is to sort of preserve the language. I think this is a very important thing, but also preserving the language and putting it to the front is like I connected to the retrospective activation of national identity, and I think I just don't believe in it that much, because what has happened in Belarus this summer has happened without the language. It has happened without that. So this whole process of post-colonial revolution, it started in the context where the language is repressed a lot. And also in comparison to the situation in Ukraine, I also believe that Belarusian revolution has been compared to Ukrainian situation a lot, which is completely wrong, because in Ukraine, this is precisely the path that they followed. It was like a revival of romantic ethno-nationalism. So for them, language was like, yes, let's revive the language, let's reject all this Soviet stuff. But in Belarus, it just doesn't work. It seems like people who go to the protest, they just don't see the language that they're using as an instrument of oppression. I would put it this way.
Is there a prospect for a greater role of the language in the society?
It's impossible to predict it at this point again, because like I do my research without any funding, and a lot of researchers in Belarus who have this methodological apparatus that they want to apply, they have to do it outside of institutions in their free time. So you see that it's just very hard to answer this kind of questions at the moment.
Okay, and so I'd like to open the floor then to Alex.
Hi, thank you. I have a question for, all the talks are really great, thank you, but I have a question for Dr. Dubinka-Hushcha about her presentation. I think your research is really interesting, I think because there's a lot of increased scholarship trying to make connections in the Middle Ages between East and West. And during this period, Ukrainian historiography has focused a lot on the daughter of Yaroslav the Wise, marrying King Henri I. And I think your research is really, really interesting for that and other reasons. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about this increasing scholarship that looks at connections between East and West in the Middle Ages, and how your research, especially through visual material, helps us better understand this period. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. It's really a pleasure to hear that you found it interesting. And unfortunately, I cannot, at this moment, I cannot say that there is a big body of scholarship in relation to Belarus, at least. And of course, there are reasons for that, partly because of lack of access, for example, for Belarusian scholars, lack of information for the Western scholars, particularly like in a country like Denmark, people are not even aware very often about such stories. So we help them to open the eyes on their own history by this way. As you know, in culture and intercultural communication is a way also to look at yourself by the eyes of the other. So what we are trying to do, and what I say we because me and a few other colleagues, we have started a Danish Belarusian Culture Association called Vladania, and we collaborate with scholars from Sweden, from Poland, from neighboring countries, trying to excavate those stories, trying to restore this past, and not only from the dark Middle Ages, but also more recent periods. For example, we know that examples of Skaryna Bible are stored in the in the Royal Library in Copenhagen. So we're also trying to restore this period of life when he was serving the Danish king. Nobody has done that before. There are also a lot of famous people from Belarus who had their roots. We have this idea, the painter Ferdinand Ruschitz, his mother was from Denmark, in fact. She was a Dane and she was born and her father was from the Isle of Bornholm. So this way we are trying to restore those memories, trying to give Belarusians their memory back, and also trying to enrich the Danish society by getting to know Belarusian culture. We really hope that it will not be a white spot on their mental map anymore, and it will be more positive, not only the negative connotation. The Belarus will not only have the negative connotation for Danes, but due to the recent history, but will also have a positive image of a country which is actually quite close historically, culturally, and so on. So please, I don't want to take too much time of the conference today, but please reach out and please follow us, Biladania, please follow us on the media, social media, and we'll be happy to tell you all about our projects. I'll write in the chat the name.
Great. And I see one last hand for a question. Please unmute your mic and ask.
Lizaveta, I'm Tatiana. I wanted to ask you a question, more or less technical question in your presentation. Maybe I've missed.
Introduce yourself, Tatiana.
Pardon?
Could you introduce yourself, please?
Tatiana, University of Dundee, Scotland. Tatiana Kostyukowicz, University of Dundee, Scotland. Not a historian, but I'm interested where crosses like that have been manufactured. I bet there's a lot of information out there on where these crosses have been made. They probably haven't been made in Kiev or in Polotsk. They probably have been brought from Byzantium, and it's just a matter of finding which route they were traveling. They traveled to, say, Polotsk, and then onwards to Denmark.
Yeah, I also when I read about this statement about this hypothesis by Fritz Lindahl in this newspaper from 1978, I was thinking, gosh, this is the place. Actually, she's right, because the crosses resemble each other so much. And I talked to a few jewelry masters in Belarus. You know, St. Euphrosyne cross was restored by Nikolai Kuzmich from Brest, and he studied those techniques a lot. And when I showed him the cross, he also shared my opinion that those crosses can be related. And for me, maybe it's not even so important whether it belonged to Sophia or Rihitsa or Dama, any woman, you know, they could all have owned it in turns. That's totally fine. But just knowing that also opens up for the Belarusian shrine, which is lost, because the thing I didn't say in my presentation, but something that I also believe is that, not to sound too superstitious, but the Belarusians have lost this cross of St. Euphrosyne. It was stolen, and it was considered to be a protector of Belarus. So perhaps now, if we know that the cross, which is stored in Denmark, was made by the same person or by the person from the same school or the same area, it also brings us more knowledge about our national shrine, which we don't have in our territory anymore. So that's also one of the reasons why I wanted to share this idea with you, and also to invite you to collaborate and to investigate more of this issue.
All right. Well, that's our time for the society panel. I would like to thank the three speakers so much for Mark, Lizaveta, and Alena for your very interesting talks. I wish we had more time to do questions, but I would encourage people to fire the speakers, messages on chat, and also to look at the beldania.org site and all these things. Thank you so much. And after a 10-minute break now, we will return with the next panel.